everybody. It's Steve here with another episode of Shots from the Right. And today I'm going to deal a little bit with President Trump, all presidents really, Congress, and the power to declare war. Who's right, who's wrong, and why and how. When a Democrat president's in office and he uses the military, as we've seen all of them do, the Republicans in Congress and the media and libertarians start screaming, only Congress has the power to declare war, the War Powers Act, 60 days, 90 days, 150 days. And then we have a Republican president like Trump or George W. Bush or George H.W. or whoever. And then the Democrats scream, only the Congress has the right to declare war and the War Powers Resolution, the War Powers Act, and president has to do this, 60 days, 90 days, 150 days. It's always a big political mess. Libertarians, on the other hand, are always yelling about using the military. Right, wrong, or indifferent, needed, not needed, who knows, flip a coin. Libertarians are don't use the military, no new wars. I'm against war. I'm a military retiree. My family has served in the military dating all the way back to 1775, almost continuously an unbroken chain going all the way up to today. To this very day, my son is still in the military. So, nobody, I maintain, is more anti-war than members of the United States military. Who's right? Who's wrong? Well, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. Let's start with our Constitution. What does the Constitution say? You know what it says. The Congress shall have power to declare war, to grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and water. So, what does all of that mean? Do you know? Letters of marque and reprisal. Private vessels, public authority. Congress authorizes privately owned vessel to capture the enemy ships, property, subject to the rules, accountability, and judgment by a private court. All right. So there's a whole lot of stuff going in these letters of marque and reprisal. What does it mean to declare war? Well, I got a few things here. I did a little research. Now, we have to remember, we can't look at our Constitution under today's definitions. You know, people don't realize there's modern words in our modern world that don't mean the same thing they meant in the 18th century when the Constitution was written. And there's things in law where a word or a phrase doesn't mean the same thing in law as it does in real life. Same thing in medicine. So we have to go back through time to the 18th century and see what they meant when they said declare war. What did that involve? Well, I've got it right here in my hands, and this is what it says. In the 18th century, a formal declaration of war triggered a major cascading legal shift under international law, the law of nations, cleanly dividing a peacetime legal regime from a wartime one. It instantly transformed legal rights, neutral commerce, and the treatment of persons or property. So declaring war didn't just mean using the military, right? Does everybody understand that? It didn't just mean using the military. It meant a lot more than that. So, for example, here's another thing. The legal effects on belligerents. These are the parties at war. Status of persons. Citizens of the opposing nations instantly became legal enemies, authorizing direct combat, the capture of enemy military personnel, and the detention or expulsion of enemy civilian aliens, cancellation of treaties, confiscation of properties. There was also a rippling effect, it says here, to, who's trying to get in touch with me? A rippling effect to third-party states. Let's see what those were. Law of prize and neutral shipping. A declaration officially notified neutral nations that a state of public war existed, which activated rigorous maritime enforcement laws. Belligerents gained the right to search neutral shipping for contraband and enforce blockades. Now, President Trump's doing a little bit of that right now over in the Strait of Hormuz. John F. Kennedy did some of that when we blockaded Cuba during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Duties of impartiality. Neutral states were legally required to observe strict impartiality, prohibiting them from favoring either belligerent with military aid or allowing their territories to be used as staging grounds without violating neutrality. So that's a thing, right? The let's see what I got here. It affects even neutral countries. Now, here's where the problem comes in. One of the problems comes in my opinion. Every president of the United States, I'll tell you what, let's back up a minute, all right? We're dealing with, we're dealing with declaring war. So it's kind of illustrative to go back and look at how many times, when, and where our country has declared war, our Congress, because you would think it's a lot because we've been at war pretty much constantly since 1775, right? So you would think there would be a whole lot of times we've declared war. Well, you'd be wrong, as most people are when talking about this stuff. Here is a list of official declarations of war, and it starts with the War of 1812. Now, we go on to the Mexican-American War in 1846, Spanish-American War. We went from 1846 to 1898. There was no declaration of war for the Civil War, 1861, 1865. There's no declaration of war there by either side, really, I guess. So World War I, we declared war on Germany in 1917, and then Austria-Hungary in 1917. That's according to Encyclopedia Britannica, as you see there. We got to footnote this stuff here. People demand the receipts. Now, World War II. See, 6 times we declared war during World War II. Let me biggerize that, as Trump might say for you. There you go. We declared war on Japan, Germany, Italy, Bulgaria, Hungary, and Romania. All right? Those are official declarations of war. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 times in the history of our country. There's no declaration there. Let's see what's missing. There's no declaration there of war for the Korean War, for the Vietnam War, for the war on terror even. You would think they would get it right for the war on terror, right? So that's how many times we've declared war. Why and how and where. I didn't see the Indian Wars on there. Those lasted a long, long time. All right? So now we all know the President of the United States has some responsibilities. He takes an oath of office. Let me see if I got that up here. I got the Partridge Family going on in my head. Can you believe that? All right, I don't see it here in my file, but let's go. Before he enters on the execution of his office, this is the President of the United States, and this is Clause 8. This is Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States of America. Before he enters on the execution of his office, he shall take the following oath or affirmation. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will faithfully execute the office of the President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, that's his oath of office. That's the responsibility he takes on when he takes on the presidency. Now, let's go under Section 2, powers. These are the powers of the presidency, the executive branch of government. The president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States and of the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. Now, I want you to notice something there. It doesn't say when war is declared. It says when called into actual service. Is that just a flowery, phrase, turn of phrase, ruffles and flourishes there? I'll leave that up to you. He may require the opinion in writing of the principal officer in each of the executive departments upon the subject relating to the duties of the respective offices. Okay. Power to grant. So that's it. Those are his responsibilities. Commander-in-Chief of the Army and of the United States and the militia of the several states when called into the actual service of the United States. Does that presume that a declaration of war has already occurred? I don't know. I'm going to have to go back and look at the debates in the Constitutional Congress on what that meant. That's the only place to go to know this kind of stuff, right? And to look at how they actually applied it themselves. Well, there's something else I want you to notice. Under those declarations of war, let me bring that back up here. You know, there's one that's missing that was actually very, very early in our country, and it's the only time that a president of the United States himself, in person, mounted up and led a column of militia, presumably into battle. That's where they were going. And I don't see it here on our list. George Washington, the first president of the United States. Have you ever heard of the Whiskey Rebellion? As commander-in-chief, he mounted up, and he was going to lead this militia army against these riotous insurrectionists that were tar and feathering tax collectors and everything, the revenuers, right, in the Whiskey Rebellion. And I don't see that here. He was leading a military in the field. George Washington, the first president under the fledgling Constitution. Thomas Jefferson. He was, of course, you know him from Declaration of Independence fame. He was actually in France, an ambassador to France when the Constitution was written. But he was like the third president under the Constitution of the United States. And we had the Barbary Wars, and I don't see a declaration of war there. So what this tells me with the Founding Fathers is you don't have to have a declaration of war in order to use the military. You just don't. So that's my opinion, of course, and you're free to form your opinion. So we've gone through the president's constitutional duty, right? We had the oath of office. I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's as president. And then as commander-in-chief, the president shall be commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States, right? Powers entrusted, duty sworn, right? You see it right there. And so what's a man to do, right, as president? Well, here's part of the problem as I see it, and this is every president of the United States, not just Republican, not just Democrat, it's every one of them. It no longer takes an enemy 2 or 3 months to sail to our shores in square rigger ships, right? We all remember 9/11. The enemy was inside the wire, hijacked airplanes and turned them into weapons and killed, 3,000 people, damn near as big as Pearl Harbor. And we all know who the nuclear nations are, the Soviet Union, North Korea, China, India, Pakistan. We all know who they are. We all know Iran has been trying to get the bomb, right? We all know that. There's one right there. So all presidents have to deal with this, and they're trying to balance their oath of office and their responsibilities with their constitutional powers, if I'm to give them all the benefit of the doubt. The Korean War. We went to war, and it was a war. They called it a police action. It was a real shooting war. They went under a UN mandate, just like we did in Desert Storm, under a UN mandate. Oops, wait a minute. I didn't see that under a declaration of war. But so using the military and declaring war are not synonymous. I think we pretty much established that. Not in any century of the 250 years we've existed. Not with any president, Republican or Democrat, right? And there's always this struggle. It's a power struggle between Congress and the executive branch and even the judicial branch. And it was intended to be a struggle. It's part of our system of checks and balances. Now, so along those lines, in regard to the Korean War and the Vietnam War, these long slugfests, Korea was 3 years. Eisenhower put an end to that. This slugfest in Vietnam, right? That debacle, Gulf of Tonkin, resolution and LBJ, and there's conspiracy theories about airlines owned by Lady Bird Johnson that were going to fly our men and women over to Vietnam and made tons of money, and so in 1973, according to the research, Congress came up with what we know as the War Powers Act. Okay, The War Powers Act of 1973 is a federal law designed to check the U.S. president's power to commit the country to an armed conflict without the consent of Congress. And it goes on to say the origin, Congress passed the War Powers Resolution in November 1973 over President Richard Nixon's veto. There's a way to do that. Just check out the Constitution. It was a direct reaction to prolonged U.S. involvement in the Korean and Vietnam Wars, plus secret military bombings in Cambodia, which happened without formal declarations. Now, see, I take exception to that a little bit, as if these bombings in Cambodia were a separate issue. They were part of the Vietnam War, part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, part of that whole effort. They were not a separate issue. So, but now, no president, Democrat or Republican, has ever acknowledged the constitutionality of the War Powers Act. That's just a fact. Since 1973, no president has acknowledged the constitutionality or the restrictions of it. Not just Trump. No president. All right? So let's go back and look at this. Has the court ever ruled on it? Federal courts. Well, first let's go through the core rules of the act itself. The president must tell Congress within 48 hours of deploying military forces into hostile situations. There's a 60-day limit. Without a formal declaration of war or specific congressional authorization, troops must be withdrawn within 60 days. Now, it says there, congressional authorization. It doesn't say without a formal declaration of war. It doesn't say that. It says without specific congressional authorization. Well, like they did a resolution, in Desert Storm, and they funded the effort, and they funded the 20-year war on terror. Did they abrogate their responsibility to declare war? We used the military without a declaration of war. So again, another example of checks and balances and not needing a declaration of war in order to deploy the military. So let's go on here. A 60-day limit without a formal declaration, 30-day extension. President gets an extra 30 days, 90 days total, solely to safely pull the troops out, which is something Biden failed to do in Afghanistan. So there's an ongoing debate here. As this says, there's constitutional conflict. Every president since 1973 has argued that the act is an unconstitutional limit on their role as commander-in-chief. Every president, bipartisan. Many administrations have found ways around the rules by using brief deployments, airstrikes, or broad authorizations like past post-9/11 military force approvals. So there's a lot of hanky-panky here. There's a lot of political gamesmanship by both parties. So the only people who have clean hands in this entire debate are those big L libertarians who say hard and fast, no military without a declaration of war. Well, that takes us back to what I just said a second ago about the problem. And this is one of the problems I have with libertarians right here. It no longer takes our enemy 2 to 3 months to sail to our shores and attack us in these square rigger ships that we can see coming, right? That's not what it takes. It's airplanes. And we're all around the world, and so they, of course, can attack us all around the world. That's just the nature of the modern world. So is this a case where our Constitution hasn't kept up with the times and we need to amend it? See, I'm one of those people who doesn't believe the Constitution just magically keeps up with the changing times, through the liberal application of judicial fairy dust. It just doesn't. There's no provision for that whatsoever. And so you have to amend it. We, the people, have to amend it. And as far as I know, nobody has put forth an amendment. I'd have to go back and specifically do that research, and I have not. But so it's a modern problem. What have the courts said? Everybody wants to hear the courts weigh in. Well, the U.S. Supreme Court has never squarely ruled on the constitutionality of the 1973 War Powers Resolution. But lower federal courts and Supreme Court jurisprudence on related executive and legislative powers has addressed an element of it. Now, here's something. The Supreme Court, the legislative veto. Now, let me read you through this. The Supreme Court indirectly impacted the War Powers Act in a landmark 1983 case, and there's the name of it. I'm going to try to say that, which ruled that the legislative veto is unconstitutional. Section 5C of the War Powers Resolution allows Congress to direct the withdrawal of U.S. forces using what's called a concurrent resolution, a form of legislative veto. So that's out the window. That's what the War Powers Resolution allows Congress to do, but the Supreme Court has already ruled that unconstitutional. So legal scholars, it says here, and Congress widely viewed the specific provisions as legally weakened, blah, 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 blah. Avoidance of direct rulings. Federal courts have consistently avoided ruling on the 60-day clock and reporting requirements of the War Powers Resolution. Courts generally treat disputes over military deployments between Congress and the president as non-justicable political questions, meaning the judiciary declines to intervene in disputes between the other two coordinate branches of government. So it's up to us politically. It's a political question, is what the courts are saying. And it's up to us to decide. Well, it's easy for me to decide because the executive branch, both Democrat and Republicans, have been fairly consistent. War powers resolutions doesn't matter. Declaration of war doesn't matter. We're moving forward in our belief that we're protecting our nation, supposedly. That's if you give them the benefit of the doubt, whether they're Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, well, Jill Biden probably, or whatever staffer was actually running the country during the Biden regime. But, you know, Trump, Nixon, Reagan, Reagan in Grenada. So Jimmy Carter sending troops into the deserts of Iran for a failed hostage rescue attempt. So there's a lot of argument here, right, folks? And I come down on the side, whether it's Democrat or Republican, that the president has a responsibility to defend our country, and that responsibility expands beyond our shores because of the modern world. It's still within the original intent of the Constitution, the Constitutional Congress, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, our first presidents. It's still within the spirit and the letter of the law within the Constitution. I differ with my libertarian friends. I don't think we have to sit back and let Iran detonate a nuke over one of our overseas military bases or right here in New York City, Washington, D.C., Orlando, Florida. We don't have to wait for that. We can be preemptive, and because that's how it goes back all the way to the beginning. The people who actually wrote the phrase that Congress shall have the power to declare war, those people who wrote that phrase employed military power without a declaration of war. The Congress shall have power to declare war, grant letters of marque and reprisal, and make rules concerning captures on land and on water. Now, those things, you remember, those things have an impact internationally. They require things of neutral country. They allow us to do things to the belligerent country we're declaring war against. So there's a whole meaning there from the 18th century of what a declaration of war means. When our presidents employ our military power around the world to defend the nation in their eyes as they see it, they're doing it short of a declaration. Now, Trump is walking a line here with his blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and searching neutral shipping. Kennedy did the same thing, right, during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So, again, it's bipartisan. I'm not saying, well, he did it too, so it's okay if we do it. I'm just pointing out that it's bipartisan. It's not so much party as it is the office, the office of the president. People are doing these things because they feel, I think, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt, they feel this responsibility of their oath. And so they're doing it. Now, it's up to us, as the courts have said, it's a political question, the War Powers Act. It's up to us, you and me, to decide every 4 years if we think that president has employed and deployed the United States military as commander-in-chief for legitimate reasons. For example, I think Bill Clinton in Kosovo and Bosnia, I think that was illegitimate. You know, they invoked Rule 9, I think it is, of the NATO Charter, even though there was really no, in my opinion, as a military man who studied this stuff for years and years, there was really no danger of that war spilling out to our allies in Europe. So I think Clinton used our military force illegitimately. I think George H.W. Bush used our military illegitimately when he deployed them to Somalia as a Meals on Wheels program. And then Bill Clinton did it illegitimately when he changed that mission to go capture Mohammed Farid Adi, or whatever that guy's name was, and without changing the rules of engagement, without really changing force composition, keeping our U.S. military under Pakistani control and command, and caused Black Hawk Down. So, you know, there's enough hatred and shame going back and forth here. I think LBJ used bogus reasons to get us into Vietnam, but I think we needed to be in Vietnam. You know, because I believe in the Cold War presumption. You know, we talked about the domino theory. I think it was a domino plan. And you can see after we left Vietnam, 17 more countries fell to Soviet domination or influence. I think the proof is in the history. So, anyway, this is a debate that's for sure going to go on as long as our country exists, as long as we have this political structure, as long as we have our three branches of government, the legislative, judicial, and executive. And it's going to be a fight. What I don't think is true is I don't think that you have to have a declaration of war to employ the military, either at home or abroad. Because the men who wrote that into our Constitution deployed the military, employed military force without a declaration of war. So, I think, again, like I like to say, the proof is in the history. So, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for Shots from the Right today. I love you. I pray for you. I wish you every success in life. If you're a liberal, a leftist, I pray that God touches your heart and changes your mind. So until next time, we'll see you. Bye.